Thank you so much for joining us in person and on Zoom. We have a virtual audience as well. I'm Julia, I'm the programs director here. And I am thrilled to have Erik Brooks here with us tonight, the Camden Hills State Park Trail Supervisor. He grew up in Harpswell, Maine. He first assisted with trail maintenance on the local Cliff Trail and with a family friend on the Appalachian Trail. He then worked for 3 summers on the White Mountain Professional Trail Crew during college, and has volunteered with organizations such as the Maine Appalachian Trail Club for several years. And is this your second season working with Camden Hills State Park?
It is, yep.
Okay. Well, you're the expert, so take it away, Erik.
All right. Thank you, Julia. Hi, everybody on Zoom and in person. Thanks for coming. So the purpose of this talk is really, a lot of you may or may not have joined volunteer work on trails, whether that's building a new mountain bike trail or maintaining existing trails. But I think it's really valuable to put all those lessons together to fully understand, why we build things a certain way and how to maintain them, and just the overall big picture of all that. I got that in fragmented pieces over the years, and it was like slowly putting things together and like having aha moments. And I did also take a training actually on mechanized trail building this spring. It was an intro course. I'm not qualified to teach that yet, but just that instruction also included some of the points that I'd heard a million times in different places. But I'm like, it would be great to have a program putting all of that in one place. So my goal tonight is to impart some wisdom on how to both build and maintain trails so that they'll need less maintenance in the future. These are quote unquote sustainable trails. And if anybody has questions, if something doesn't make sense, like feel free to raise your hand. I'll call on you, or let me know if a Zoom person has a comment, question. This doesn't have to be just a lecture, conversational. So even when maintaining a poorly built trail, there are things that we can do to reduce the future maintenance. And so we'll talk about both building new and strategies for fixing. So maintenance is more than cutting blowdowns and cutting brush. I want to make that clear. The primary issues trails are facing are erosion and widening. Obviously, if a trail looks like the one on the left here, where there's a gully, people walk to the side of that because the rocky, rooted cobbles, whatever, not pleasant to walk up. Then on the right, that's actually Maiden Cliff Trail here in, well, it's actually townland, but it's in the park network, and that's a hillside just full of roots sticking up. Normally they're in the ground, but once they get trampled, all the squishy layer of fine roots gets packed down, eroded away, the roots pop up. People have told me, well, I like a rough trail. I like challenging trails. I bet if you stuck one of those people on that trail, without thinking, they would find the easiest way through that maze of roots. It's not that people don't like challenging trails. It's just human nature to look for that easy path, and trails get wider because of that. Other things like puddling or brush that's allowed to grow into the trail will cause widening too. So we'll get back to maintenance, but first off, if we're building a new trail, how do we avoid this, right? That's an important thing to get to. And so with sustainable trails, a part of that is durability. But durability and sustainability are not exactly the same thing, because durability doesn't exist in a vacuum. There's a few concepts I want to get to that I'm stealing from, the course I took with Outdoor Sport Institute, who took that from the International Mountain Bike Association publications. So I don't know who came up with these, but there's something called the pillars of sustainability. And there are 3 pillars. And if anyone is lacking, you're going to have problems with the trail. So the first is capacity. So if you're looking at building a new trail, question you need to ask is, do we have the capacity to build and maintain this properly? Do we have the workers with the skill, the money, whatever we need to put into this to make it a sustainable trail? The second is the social aspect. Is there interest? Like, is the community invested in this trail? If there aren't people who care about it, then over time you probably won't have the maintainers you need. There is no such thing as a zero maintenance trail, so this is important. And social also means, who are you building the trail for? Thinking about the user group, possible conflicts of user groups, that all wants to be like figured out and resolved before launching into a project. And the third is the just environmental sustainability, which could include like the cultural history, is that being affected, as well as the landscape, and making sure you're building the trail in a sustainable way for the environment. But if that's lacking, you'll probably get in trouble with some organization or entity. So, these are the 3 pillars to make sure you have in place, have thought through when building a trail. So then in terms of physical attributes for the trail, and this is the durability part, we've got 5 different guidelines that IMBA puts forth for how the trail should be designed. And one is to follow what's called the half rule. And that is, the slope of the trail should not exceed 50% of the slope of the hillside. If you're greater than that, it's really hard to get water to flow across the trail. So going up the hill at an angle where the grade is not beyond 50% of that hillside slope, then it's much easier for water to flow across the trail and off, rather than get channelized and flow down the trail. And a lot of professional trail builders, when they're laying out new trail, will use something called an inclinometer to actually measure those grades. I'd like to get my hands on one. I haven't yet, honestly, but also, these are things that you kind of gain a grasp for as you work on trails a lot. Like, I feel like I can, at this point, look at a slope and be like, yep, slopes like that I see degrading all the time. Slopes like this, I haven't really seen a problem. So hopefully that means I've been within 50%. I ought to get myself one though. Next is outslope. So let's say you've cut that 50% or less tread slope into the hillside, but also the tread needs to slope out so that water can flow across. Not so much that it's awkward to walk on or bike on or whatever, but it does want to outslope. Now, if you're building a bike-specific trail, certain turns and stuff often want to be insloped for the rider to go around. So this, again, you have to assess your user groups. Goes back to that social pillar. Bike trails are a little harder, I think, to build in a really durable way, because you have those riding features that sometimes dictate inslope in certain areas, but then you want to make sure that there isn't a huge catchment for water to flow down before it gets back to somewhere it can flow off. Oh yeah, I skipped over a couple because I didn't have graphics, but I forgot to mention the average grade typically given is like less than 10% for average grade of a trail, and maximum grade generally 12 to 15% for any given stretch of trail, depending on soil conditions, or else that will start to erode. So then we get to drainage features. Got to incorporate drainage features, even if you've got that outslope. Again, It's not zero maintenance, leaves, other material can pile up on the outside and you might have to, it's called deberm the trail. And another thing you can do to ensure that that your maintenance isn't the only thing keeping this trail from eroding terribly is to incorporate drainage features. So the best is an actual grade reversal that's going from downhill to uphill. So there's no way water is going to continue down the trail. It just doesn't want to go back uphill. The next best option really is what's called a rolling grade dip. Bikers are big on building these. It's a lot easier to do with machine built trails because they're long features. You need to kind of move a lot of earth. That's if you have one continuous grade, you're essentially moving enough earth to make a kind of a ramp and then a little dip. Just a grade dip would just be digging that dip in, but they tend to kind of blow out. They don't last as long as something that's really built up and long. Water has a hard time getting over that. And then the last option, which is what we often do for our old or legacy trails, is a rock water bar. Bikers don't like those. Hikers also don't like a lot of them when the rocks stick up like teeth. So there are ways to build them that are friendly to walk over, even to bike over. They can be done pretty well if the rocks are low enough and you take all the soil out and make a nice like little U shape and mount that soil over the back. It turns it into a little more like a rolling grade dip. Only if you're building them by hand. These are hand built structures. It's probably not really as long as a rolling grade dip would be. So it's going to be a quick bump on the bike, but it's not too bad. So let's say you're building a new trail. First, you got to figure out your design. And so that's where you got to consider all those guidelines we just came in. Well, first, you got to make sure you've set those 3 pillars for sustainability. You've got the capacity of people to do it and to maintain it. That you've identified the user group and you're building something they can fully support. And you've checked out the environment, where you're building the trail, not obstructing any cultural artifacts or damaging sensitive habitat or anything like that. So, and then you go out and you need to spend some time in that terrain. Having done a bit of this for reroutes in the park, I'll tell you, it takes a while. It's surprising. For a quarter-mile reroute, the first time I went to flag one of those out, I spent 4 hours wandering around before I ever set a flag. Because you're familiarizing yourself with, okay, what are the features that I would like to visit? But then what's the terrain too? And can I get there and still achieve the type of path I want to build? And so you're going back and forth and making these decisions and eventually coming up with a trail. And then once I had it flagged out, I went back a couple other times and moved the flags around a bunch. So, refining it. As you get closer, you might even move a flag from one side of a tree to another because you realize if I'm on the uphill side of this trail, then we're not going to end up with some big sloped roots that come off into the downhill that will be obnoxious to cross. So, or it improves drainage to go one side of the boulder or the other. There's nuance to it, and so take your time with that. That's the most important. That's where you incorporate the natural grade reversals is in your layout. So then once you've got your route figured out, it's time to get in there and start building. And the old way to build trails is to flag your route and cut the corridor, maybe rake the leaves off it so you can see where you're going. And that's it. And in some rare cases that works. If you're building a trail on your own property just to walk the dog, And that's about it. Maybe a friend goes with you. That's probably fine, especially if you've done a decent job laying out the trail. So there's some natural drainage spots. That's probably all you need to do. And you can tune out right now. But no, you might want to hear some more. So, but then if you're building a trail for public use, especially somewhere like Camden Hills State Park, which gets a lot of use, or if you're building mountain bike trails, which, you know, I think the tires are probably a little rougher on the terrain. Those are going to wear in really fast. And what I mean by that is the organic layer, all the like spongy, really fine roots. If you dig in the forest floor, you just find this layer, and it can be thin, it can be really thick. And it's just like spongy, full of small roots. That all gets compacted, compressed. Those roots will die. Don't feel bad about ripping them out because they're not going to hold up to foot traffic. And once that gets compacted, now the trail is a trough, and it collects water, or water can get channelized and flow down it, even if you're going less than 50% grade of the slope. It will catch the water flowing down the hillside and shoot it down the trail. So that's why we take our time and we do the hard work up front, and then we have a lot less difficult fixes like the gully I showed you at the beginning. And that's going to be a lot harder to fix than, you know, digging new trail is not fast, but it's faster than rock work. So let's do it up front, you know. And if you don't want to do it up front, you can hire people too. There's like Midcoast Trail Stewardship, new nonprofit that just started. They're devoted to trails, and they have machinery even for like mechanized trail building, if that's what you're looking to do. But there's, you know, it's important in high use areas definitely to do that grubbing work, get the organics out, and then, you know, depending if you're benching into enough of a slope, you probably have enough mineral soil in there to move around and make a nice tread. If you're in fairly flat terrain, you might actually have to dig some borrow pits, we call them, in the woods for that mineral soil. That's the clay, silt, sand, rocks, whatever, and fill those holes back up where you found a lot of organic matter. So that's what we've got going on the right. Somebody's digging a borrow pit in the woods. Somebody else is tamping it down on the trail. You know, we're just taking buckets, and then all that organic matter. I think I've got a slide of this somewhere. It's a little further. Well, I can come back. All that organic matter that we dug out, later we'll go back and collect that in the buckets. It's real light stuff. It's easy to move, and dump it in those borrow pits. And then both disappear. That's called naturalization.
What tools were you using in the previous photos?
Yeah, good question. So what the fellow on the right is holding, who's tamping the trail, that's called a rogue hoe. Other similar tools are McLeod's. Basically, it's kind of like a hoe with a sturdier handle and a really wide blade on it. And so that's great for grubbing out. I don't know if there's a better word. It kind of like cuts those fine roots. When you get to bigger roots, you'll need to pick up a pair of loppers. And the orange helmet there is clipping some larger roots, loppers. If you have real big roots, probably just want to leave those and try to cap over them. If it's a hiking trail, it might be easy enough to step over it. Don't worry about it. If it's a biking trail, you know, maybe that's where you bring in some more soil and you build over those big roots. If you don't want to cut them out, but you know, roots that you can cut with loppers, probably not going to really hurt the trees that much. You're just taking out a little swath in the trail. You know, people don't like to go over really rooted areas, and those will all pop up if you just let it go naturally. So we rub it out, re-establish a nice tread that everyone will want to follow forever, hopefully, without the trail widening. Yeah, in the background, people are using Maddox, it looks like. Those have shorter handles. I like the longer handled, like McLeod's or Rogue hose. But I'm also tall, so long handles are good for my back. Yeah, in some areas you're going to find obstacles where you're establishing. This is not easy work. In this case, this fellow is uncovering a bit of ledge, and that's all organic, that duff, rooty stuff on top of ledge. And so there's a drop in the ledge. Now, if we didn't clear it off, it would naturally get cleared off because, like I said, that stuff disappears when there's a lot of traffic on it. Those roots die. And then you just have that ledge drop in 5-10 years, however long it took. So in this case, we just cleared it right off and then said, okay, well, we need to help people get up this. So we put in a 3-step staircase up the ledge. If you're building a bike trail, maybe you'd want to build like little retaining walls on the side and fill that with dirt, make more of a ramp. Probably a little more work that way, but this wasn't a bike trail. So yeah, those are choices. Other areas, like on the right, the photo on the right shows there is a ledge that slopes across the trail. And that was a existing trail, tablelands. And that ledge was quite a bit of it was exposed, and you could see like the trail was migrating on the downhill side, and that ledge just kept getting longer and longer. And so we anchored rocks into the lower edge, filled it up with soil, and made a nice flat area with a couple steps in it leading up. Even buried a little bit of the ledge, and we had to do this building new trail recently too, where we'd run into some little bits of sloping ledge, so we build up some rocks along the edge so that we can ramp over it. So yeah.
How do you anchor the rocks?
Basically, you dig down enough that you can set them in so they're secure. And if you have something with like a sharp edge or point on it, usually that goes down and the weight of it goes up and it just like drives into the earth, with its own gravity or mass. The bigger the rocks, the better to start, and you can fill in smaller stuff and fill in over the top with dirt. We move the rocks around with rock bars and picmatics. Of course, if you have a mini excavator and you want to do this all by machine, you can. But we're not doing that, especially rehabbing old trails. You're probably not going to be doing that. So yeah, that was on tablelands. And then one last thing is on the left here, got one of my volunteers with me scrubbing lichen off rock. I thought it would be so slick to have the trail go across some ledge that was fairly level, because it's easy to walk on and it's super durable. You don't have to do anything to that. But then after it rained, discovered that the lichen was like glass and slippery. And so then we spent 3 hours scrubbing it with wire brushes. And it grips a lot better now. So you're going to run into things like that. There might be other obstacles. And so yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's good to be aware of, because I started doing some reroutes and was like surprised by something like the ledge there. Like, oh, gotta have to get creative and solve this problem. But it's all for long-term sustainability. A good place to learn how to deal with obstacles is actually not in building new trail, but in working on old trails that have problems. Sometimes fixing the old trail is actually less work than rerouting. Rerouting can be the best option if the drainage situation is just terrible. But with an old trail that's well worn, you know what the obstacles are. When you're cutting a new trail, sometimes you uncover things and you're like, oh, now I've got to deal with this. So at least you know what the obstacles are, and it's a little more straightforward figuring out how to solve them. Like, okay, we've got a wet area. There's a savanna right there for the audience. Doing stepping stones. Stepping stones are great for wet areas. So are bog bridges, although they'll rot faster. These were replacing some bog bridges, in fact. Other structures, stone steps take a little bit more time to learn to do well, but that's for areas, it hardens up areas that are getting gullied and have drainage issues you can't solve. Trail widening, sometimes just because there's no clear way to go, no great footing. You can again do a little line of rock, almost a retaining wall, but it's not necessarily a wall built up, but anchor some rocks to hold soil and kind of smooth that tread out, and then that's a clear path, and so that can eliminate your trail widening. You make one clear path, and then you can brush in the sides with logs and stuff, and brush, and that works pretty good. So maintenance is a great way to learn how you might need to build new trail, like some of the obstacles you'll find. Also on the subject of maintenance, now that you know a little bit more about trail design and the structures that go into it, hopefully you'll start to recognize those structures when you're out here and realize how they need to be maintained. So that water bar picture I showed you earlier, here it is bigger. Whoever had cut the tree down out of the trail didn't know what a water bar was, and they threw it right in the drainage. So now water that runs downhill is going to just be diverted right over the stones because it's all clogged up. So it's helpful to know excuse me, what these structures are, what they're for, and then you can properly maintain them. Find somewhere else to throw that brush, and then ideally twice a year, clean that water bar out, get the leaves and stuff out that are clogging it up, so it ensures that it will continue draining. It may also get silted up with sand, small rocks. Actually drag those over the water bar and help make it a little more of a berm that's easier to go over rather than jagged rocks.
So the intent here is to have the water go kind of up and cross down that gully.
Yeah, so we're looking uphill.
Blocking it, so now the water's going to come across the slide, you might say, and cut a gully across your trail this way.
Yeah, it'll just continue down the trail is what it's going to do, because the water was getting blocked by the logs, so it could overflow that line of rocks and then continue down the trail, which is worn in, so it captures water. Other types of maintenance. I mentioned earlier, like trail widening is one of the primary issues, and some of that can actually happen from brush growing into the trail or things bending over, especially if you're going alongside of a slope and you're out there with a pair of loppers brushing. Be mindful that plants reaching for the light on a hill slope come into the trail from the uphill side, or they'll lean in, and you need to keep that cut back or the trail always migrates downhill. So yeah, and the best way to gain experiences in this is to join a group and volunteer. This is a group in the Camden Hills State Park where I work. I lead volunteers multiple times a week. People can get in touch with me anytime. But I've also got an email list, and so I try to say like a few days a week, here's where we're going to be working if you want to join me. Then there's other groups like Coastal Mountains Land Trust or Georges River Land Trust or wherever your local land trust is. I'm sure they have work days. Great to get some experience. It'll be varied. That's why I like to have this presentation, put it all in one place, because you're not going to learn this all in one volunteer session. But you'll get some practice with the various tools, maybe learn which tools you like if you're thinking about getting into building some trails. And that, I think, is about it. Yeah.
Okay. Cool, thank you so much, Eric.
Sure thing.
And I have a question.
Sure.
What if you, say you encounter a trail that breaks the half rule or something?
Yeah.
And like, is that, or some other thing where you're like, oh, well, that wasn't done correctly? Is that an automatic candidate for like something needs to be done? Or how do you decide when it's worth it to make a change? Does it have to be like, oh, this is drastically, degrading the area? Or is it like, no, they shouldn't have done that way? Let's
Right.
change it.
I'm glad you brought that up because, so, for instance, Camden Hills State Park, pretty much every trail in the park breaks the half rule most of the time. Those trails go straight up, straight down the mountains. And so there are a lot of areas that are really bad, but you don't need to wait until they get that bad either. The adage, a stitch in time saves nine. Well, a rock in time saves at least nine as well. So putting in either a rock water bar, like maybe it needs another drainage structure, or maybe you just need to add some steps, like that will actually slow the water as if you kind of fill that gully, that helps slow down the water and reduce erosion, as well as make it more pleasant to hike up. So yeah, I mean, legacy trails are challenging. There's plenty of issues in them. But like if we go all the way back to, I remember I have a picture. Oh wait, that's the one. Get the words out of the way. All the way back to, here is on Maiden Cliff Trail. And this is just recently, this spring, some work I did. On the left, we have a short reroute. The trail actually took off to the right of that tree. And the area was like roots, exposed ledge that was sloped. There was nothing I could really see that was an easy fix for that section. Ironically, that section was only like 4 years old because that's where somebody from the town had put up strings to divert people out of the old trail that was eroded. So they made a reroute, didn't establish it in any way, and it turned out there was some big sloped ledge under there, and then all sorts of roots popped up as well. And it gets so much use that it only took a couple of years before it was bad, and it was widening, ever getting wider. So it took some time, put some rocks on the edge of the trail to help reinforce, hold that dirt. It still has a bit of outslope. So goes along a little lower and then up an old staircase that I kind of rehabbed where it rejoins the old trail and then comes back into where their reroute ended. So there are candidates for rerouting. On the right, this is right above there, and just before that other photo with all the roots I took. But the trail actually had spread, so there's the big log on the right-hand edge. There was another 15 feet width of trail to the other side of that log, in addition to the side we're working on. And, again, roots exposed, it's unclear, like, where do you go here? But in that area, I determined that, it's actually going to be faster to fix this versus trying to cut a reroute that would have gone way around and been huge and a massive amount of work in that terrain. Actually easier to fix a few spots by shoring things up and making one clear, smooth path with a few steps in it, but otherwise pretty smooth, that people will take. And then by doing that in a few areas, not all of that has been done, but the first area has been done. I think we can bring the trail back to a reasonable width. It's a lot easier to maintain like a 4 or 6 foot wide trail than it is a 30 foot wide trail. So trying to bring it back in. And it's doable. It just takes time.
Eric, I have a question. I don't know if it's fair or not, but I'm old, but I've been walking and hiking all my life.
Mhm.
And I started in California, and then I lived there for a long time, and I lived in Colorado for a long time. And then I got here, and the trails here are the worst in the country. In terms of, they just go straight up. They don't make any attempt to build the trail. All the other states, whoever built the trails had thought. They did switchbacks, they made it nice, the grades are nicer.
Mhm.
They're thinking about the three fundamentals, I don't know. And I'm trying to figure out what happened here. And I don't know if it's because there's less soil.
There is
or-
that.
Or whether there's less, because there's more private land, there's not BLM and so federal grants, I don't know. But it's been a mystery to me how poorly constructed the trails are.
Yep.
Yeah, they're just
Yeah.
awful.
That's a
The old
valid,
ones,
that's a
not the
valid
new ones,
question.
not the ones you're doing. They're great.
But you don't even have to look that far back in history. So like the Frohawk Mountain Trail,
Yeah,
you're familiar with it.
yeah, but that's, yeah,
It was built in the 90s.
yeah.
And there were like multiple state organizations. The International Mountain Bike Association sent out a couple guys to help with like trail planning. And then a couple local guys got to actually build it once all that was done. And it was like a 3-year planning process. And they came up with something that, like, yeah, it's not a straight line, but none of it was established in any way. It doesn't have grade reversals. It just kind of curves its way down the mountain and water follows that
And
curve.
yeah, and it's really steep in
Between
some spots.
between
really
Dairy
steep.
Mountain and the bottom there
Yeah.
is has a lot of gullies. And
Yeah.
so I think just the general understanding of trail building has come a long way. But to that point of why did they do it right out west?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, in part it could have been the culture of using pack animals out there that
And they
we
use
didn't
pack
have here.
animals a lot.
And so that's like easier for the animals. And I think another is soil. When I've been doing a new trail here in the park, there is a lot of digging borrow pits,
Yeah,
a lot of it,
a lot.
because you have your layer of duff that can be pretty thick,
And then nothing.
and then often not a lot else to work with.
Mm.
So you can find pockets or mounds. Often it seems that the higher ground has less of that duff layer before you get into good mineral soil. But then where you go through a low spot, you find yourself digging really deep to get down to anything solid. And so then you have a really deep hole you have to fill in with some better stuff. And so you end up carting a lot of buckets around. Hopefully you're digging close by and then refilling it with the organic stuff afterwards. So I think, yeah, part of it could be soil.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a mystery.
Part of it is potentially economics. I mean, you look at Acadia and the carriage trails there are phenomenal, and none of them are very
Private.
steep.
Yeah, it's all private.
But it was like Rockefeller money.
Yeah, it's private money.
Whereas in the park, those are all old carriage roads, but they were made by just the locals trying to get around and trying to scrape by with their agricultural settlements that existed in the park. And so they kind of just plowed the roads in. There was no building the road up. They plowed them in, and that was the carriage road for the most part.
Pretty interesting fact that they use a lot more pack animals out west, which would have affected your choice of route, because sometimes ride skateboards down here in Cadillac in the off season when there's no cars. And I thought I was learning Mount Batty to go down Cadillac, but Cadillac is a much gentler grade. And I think it's because it was built for carriages.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, a car can, put it in there and the car just hit the gas, but the horses can't really do that. So it was really stunning to see that difference between.
Oh, yeah.
And I know these are auto roads, not what we're talking about, but that
Well,
kind
I
of,
mean,
that driving factor.
Trail building is basically mini road building. Like drainage is, and having a solid base, it's kind of the same concepts there.
Yeah.
One of my volunteers who worked for Camden Public Works for years told me that their road building mantra was drainage, drainage, drainage. And I was like, I'm gonna steal that from one of my newsletter emails for trails.
Absolutely.
I'm just curious, it's been fascinating watching the around the mountain trail going in at Dragon. I know it's on the state park, but I wonder if you or anybody has any, I mean, I never really thought about this kind of stuff when you're walking a trail. I'm sure a lot of people don't.
Right.
So it's quite fascinating, but any thoughts or perspectives on that trail? I mean, or any viewpoints? I'm just curious, and if it's outside of the purvey, I guess I totally get that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I can speak to it a little bit. I don't have like any involvement in the layout or building of it. But I know like they had a professional crew building that. I think it was,
mechanized.
yeah, and it was a mechanized build. And you know, I think they did a great job with a lot of it, but there were certain things about that mountain, just the amount of water that comes off the mountain. They maybe didn't see everywhere that it was going to come down. And during these heavy rainstorms, you get a lot of little streams that only exist during that rainstorm. And they cause washouts on that trail all the time because it's steep terrain that it's built in. And maybe the aggregate used wasn't the best for holding up. And so there's a bunch of maintenance, continued maintenance on that.
I remember when it was being built, it seemed quite a lot of mechanized.
Yep.
You kind of go down.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Well, by the way, Nancy, who you met on the trail, is here on Zoom and says, "Thank you so much from Nancy that you met on the trail today."
Right. Glad I told you that.
Yeah, and someone else said, "Wow, this is great." So, thank you very much, Eric.
Well,
Thank
you've
you.
done a lot of great work. I've been hiking around for years and just noticing all the new work. I'm like, wow, this guy's been around, there's been a lot of changes. Just a couple of days ago, I went up the trail that goes right beside the auto road up Batty. I'm like, oh, it's reroutes now. And it went out and it went over this big ledge. I was like, yes, go Eric. It's so beautiful. So
Yeah.
good job.
Thank you. Yeah, and you know, trail work, as anyone who's joined me, especially doing reroutes or rock work, like it's not fast, but getting out there every day, I hear that a lot. Just how much has been done. I'm like, I only did, you know, we only covered 30 feet today, or only covered 10 feet building the staircase, but it adds up by its continuity. And so I think that's just important if you're considering trail building is, you know, it's a time commitment, but like don't get discouraged if you can allot that time up front, just keep it going and it gets there, it gets done.
How can people get involved in Camden Hills State Park?
Yeah, so great question. Thank you. I should be a better marketer for myself. But so if you're here in the audience and you want to put your name on that blank piece of paper with an email, I have an email newsletter. I send it out BCC. Or if you want to contact me to get on the newsletter, my email address is camdentrails@gmail.com.
Okay, I'll put that in the chat. for Zoom.
Also have Camden Trails as an Instagram account, so you can follow that if you want to see people working on trails on a more or less daily basis. Yeah, those are the best ways to get involved with me. You know, Coastal Mountains has a website. You can find their info there if you want to get involved with them. Or McNimba, if you're a biker and you want to get on some bike trails, they have work days sometimes. You know, there's all sorts of different groups. You can go up to Acadia. Friends of Acadia is real organized with volunteer work. So all sorts of ways, different places you can learn.
Thank you so much.